Good morning. It is currently 9 o'clock. We'll get started in about 2 minutes, give an opportunity for others to join. Thank you. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for the State Water Resources Control Board's Water Quality Fee Stakeholder Meeting. This meeting is being held virtually through Zoom and webcast platform, and also is being recorded. My name is David Ceccarelli, and I'm the Fee and Revenue Branch Chief within the Division of Administrative Services. Today, we have many of the Fee and Revenue Branch staff working behind the scenes to ensure that this meeting runs as smoothly as possible. If any time throughout this event you find that you're having technical difficulties, please email us at feebranch@waterboards.ca.gov. That email is also on the agenda. From the Water Board's Fee and Revenue Branch, and assisting me today in this presentation is Cassandra White and Jackie Carter. I would also like to introduce John Russell, the Deputy Director of the Division of Administrative Services, and in a moment, he'll be providing some opening comments. Before we get started, let's go over some meeting guidelines. 1, individuals attending via Zoom, please use the raise the hand function if you'd like to ask a question or provide a comment, and staff will enable your microphone in the order of hands raised. If you're joining us through the webcast, you can also submit a comment or ask a question by emailing the email on the screen. Again, feebranch@waterboards.ca.gov. Remember to use the handouts that were sent to you via email. If you do not have the handouts, don't worry. We will be sharing the documents on the screen. You can request a copy of the documents after the meeting, or the handouts are posted on the Water Board's fee webpage. For the meeting to run efficiently and stay on track, we are requesting each participant who wants to ask a question to please ask one question at a time. I understand you may have a clarifying question to your original question, and that is acceptable. Once your question is fully answered, we're going to move on to the next participant's question, and you will be put back into the order of participants who are requesting to ask a question. In addition, we respect all opinions and input. However, if the discussion starts to move away from the intent of the meeting, which is to discuss water quality fees, then I'm going to ask that the participant and I meet offline to coordinate these discussions further and involve appropriate staff as needed. So at this time, let's review the agenda. Item number 2 is the waste discharge permit fund budget cost drivers. That'll be attachment 1 in your handout. We'll also discuss a budget change proposal as part of the cost drivers. Item number 3 is the waste discharge permit fund program budget detail, which is attachment 2. Item number 4 is the waste discharge permit fund condition, attachment 3. Item 5, a discussion on a potential fee structure change in the water quality certification program. And please keep in mind that this proposal would not take place in the current or in the fiscal year 25-26. It's actually a proposal for 26-27. We're just trying to get out in front and start to have some discussion about it. Finally, item 6 is open discussion, and then next steps, which leads to our July 31st stakeholder meeting. So at this time, I'm going to toss it to John Russell, the Deputy Director of Division Administrative Services.
Thank you, David. Yeah, just a few brief introductory remarks before we get into the body of our presentation. The first thing I wanted to mention is that, as we talked about last time, we had a couple of excuse me, we had a couple of budget reduction drills that we were going through. Excuse me. Hey, David, could you take it over for a minute?
Yeah, no problem. So as John mentioned, we had a couple of two budget reduction drills that impacted all of our funds at the water boards, basically. Budget letter 2420 was a reduction drill for vacancies. So we were asked to reduce the number of vacancies with our organization. And then the other drill was basically 2424 budget letter, which basically authorized us basically to reduce our overall operation budget. And we had to reduce that by about roughly around 7.95%.
Thanks, David. I'm back now. It's allergy season where I live, and it's bad this year. So anyway, as David went through, and I think we talked a little bit about this in our last stakeholder meeting, we did have these 2 budget reduction drills. The results hadn't been released yet during our last stakeholder meeting, but they are released now. But one of the things you might notice is the 8% reduction doesn't translate directly into an 8% reduction in any given fees. The water board prioritized our cuts, and we did not take a proportional cut across all of our funds. We actually targeted the reductions that we made so that our highest priority programs weren't too adversely affected. And that'll be clear once we get into the discussion of the budget cost drivers. And then the second point I wanted to make, which might make my first point moot, is that the Senate and the Assembly and the administration are entering that period of the budget negotiations where they talk and they come up with something that's different than what's in the May revise. Yesterday, the Senate voted on pretty much what they call the 2-party agreement, which is the agreement that the Assembly and the Senate came to. Most of our reductions stayed in place, but there are some key reductions that the legislature does not agree with. So at this point, like I said, in the budget negotiations, the administration and the legislative leaders will go behind closed doors essentially and do a little bit more negotiating. So what we're presenting today is based on the May revised budget. We don't know how those negotiations will play out, but I would not be surprised if things change a little bit in the final budget. So I'm just going to encourage everybody to attend our next board or our next stakeholder meeting, probably in June or July, when the budget is adopted, and we will have more or less final numbers that we'll be taking to our board for consideration. And with that, I'll flip it back to David.
Thank you, John. So we'll go ahead and start with the item number 2, which is the budget cost drivers. I'm going to toss this to Jackie. And again, as John mentioned, this information is based off of the May revised budget. which was released roughly about a month ago.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. In the first table of the Waste Discharge Permit Fund budget cost drivers, it shows the fiscal year 24-25 fee setting budget of about 202 million, followed by the governor's May revise fee setting budget for fiscal year 25-26 is just over 187 million, reflecting a net decrease of about 14.5 million or 7.2%. In the second table, it shows the primary cost drivers of the net difference shown above. The first cost driver is state operations, a decrease of nearly 3.9 million or 1.9%. State ops is primarily employee compensation, healthcare cost, and retirement. The next cost driver is the only BCP for fiscal year 25-26, legal resources to respond to federal actions in the amount of 200,000 or 0.1%. The next cost driver is pro rata, which has a decrease of approximately 1.5 million or 0.7%. Of note, pro rata has decreased over the last 2 years. The last two cost drivers are reductions in savings adjustments. The first one is section 4.05, government efficiencies reductions. This is a budget reduction resulting from fiscal year 24-25 budget letter 24-24. This item has a decrease of about 4.3 million or 2.1%. The second one is section 4.12, vacancy savings and position elimination adjustment. This adjustment savings was for vacancies and positions being eliminated as a result of fiscal year 24-25 budget letter 24-20. This item has a decrease of about 5.1 million or 2.5%. So the budget letters resulted in a total reduction of about 9.4 million or 4.6%. And that concludes our look at the water quality cost drivers. Overall, the fund has a decrease by 14.5 million, which is about 7.2%. And before we go into any questions, I'll hand it over to Cassandra to discuss the BCP. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie, and good morning. So the one BCP we had, it was the legal resources to respond to federal actions. The California Environmental Protection Agency, the California Air Resources Board, and the State Water Resources Board would receive 2.9 million from various special funds and 12 permanent positions in fiscal year 25-26 and ongoing to defend California's environmental laws and programs that advances the state's climate, water, public health, and overall environmental protection in response to increased federal legal challenges. The Water Board's portion is $800,000 and would support 3 permanent positions. The WDPF is one of the 4 Water Board's funds that will receive $200,000. The other 2 fee funds are Safe Drinking Water Account and the Water Rights Fund. And the 4th fund is non-fee, but it's the Underground Storage Tank Cleanup Fund. And if you would like any more information on the BCP, you could use the link that's in the handout for more information.
Thank you. Thank you, Cassandra. Thank you, Jackie. And before we start taking questions, I just again want to recap. Back in September of 2024, when we went to the board with our fee setting budget of almost $202 million. And then based on the May revise, the budget with these reductions of about 14.5 million, The budget in the May revise is roughly 187 million currently. Again, being driven by the 2 reduction drills. And then what's also happening is, of course, our state operations in this fund is being reduced just overall because of IDC and overhead. Now that the fund is lower, we're taking less IDC and overhead rates on the position. So there's also some savings in the state ops side of things. And also, of course, what's happening is pro rata, of course, is our share of other state agencies' cost, as we kind of mentioned before. And of course, all state agencies are doing the same drill as us. So, their budgets start to get reduced, which basically means pro rata is lower on that end also. So the share of pro rata has dropped. So again, I think it's also, though, important to note that, again, this is based off of the May revised information. And so, we're providing what we know as of right now. So with that said, let's go ahead and open up the questions. Good morning, Bob. I see your hand up.
Yes, you do. Good morning, David, and Jackie, Cassandra, John, and Sarah. Thank you for all the work you've done on this and for the data and detail. I have a brief comment. As you're well aware, the BCP is improper. It is a general fund expense, not fee payers or ultimately rate payers. It is also, and I find this as a policy matter, wrong. It's not a permanent 12 PY program. At the very best, at the high level of tolerance, it's probably half that limited term, because these White House set policies will change when the occupant on the White House changes. I fail to understand the permanence of any of this other than as a reason to build staff for no reason. These comments are offered on behalf of the cities of Fresno, Long Beach, Santa Cruz, Woodland, Antioch, Modesto Irrigation District, Kings River entities, Kern County Water, and several other entities that are all in writing in my email. Thanks for listening.
Hey, Bob, thank you for your input. Taking a moment here to see if there are any other questions currently on the budget cost drivers. I will pause just for a moment, just ask if there's any questions. No email questions at this time.
Yeah, and while we're waiting to see if we have any questions, we do hear you loud and clear, Bob. I don't really have an answer to any of those. This was a coordinated BCP amongst all of the Cali, PA boards, departments, and offices. So we kind of jumped into it, but some of those decisions that they made, I'm not sure how they got to that point.
Good morning, Sharon. You have your hand up?
Yes, hi. Good morning. Sharon Green with Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts. I had a question, and I haven't read those budget letters, so it may be addressed in those, but are these reductions that are related to the budget letters from last year's budget process one time? In other words, will they be sustained, or will these levels will these reductions bounce back, in a year or 2 years or some set time period?
No, they were intended to be permanent reductions.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
So that's they should stick at least for a while, and there may be, some rebound in certain areas, but they were intended to be permanent. And that's the way we're approaching them.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move to the next item. So you're looking at the waste discharge permit fund budget detail. And as we showed on the last slide there, what the projected fee setting budget for 25-26 is totaling is $187.3 million. And so column A there represents all of the WDPF programs, the fee paying programs, and all their share of foundational cost and their total budgets. And column C is based on our current fee structures based on the number of permits we have, forecasting, of course, application revenue. We're forecasting to collect roughly around 191 million, of course, under the current fee structures, which basically means that our revenue is exceeding expenditures by roughly around $4 million. And each of these basically kind of highlight, as an example, like WDR, the top column, revenues exceeding almost by $1.1 million based on the projected fee setting budget. Programs, though, like Water Quality Cert and Cannabis, their revenue forecast is coming in basically approximately where their budget is. But looking at column E, this basically represents what the percentage change has been based on, of course, what we projected revenue to be compared to what the budget would be. And so you can see where I'll just kind of go down the line. WDR is 2.3. Land disposal is a negative 2.5. NPDS stormwater is a negative 2%. Wastewater is a negative 1.7%. CAF is negative 5.8%, and irrigated lands regulatory program is negative 5.9%. So what does this translate? Well, of course, one of the options that staff would take to the board would basically say that, well, we're based on our current fee structures and comparing that, of course, with budgetary expenditures to balance those two out. One option would be to reduce the fee structures in each of these programs by those percentages. So, for example, again, WDR would be reduced by 2.3%. Normally, what we've done in the past is we look at the fee structures, base fees, and all the different categories, and we go ahead and we reduce each of those dollar amounts by 2.3%. By doing that, we would achieve basically kind of savings or generate less revenue by roughly around $4 million, which then now balances the budget with our revenue forecast. So again, these are the numbers that we're looking at right now based on the May revise. We'll also have a little further discussion here in a moment when we also look at the fund condition statement. However, again, this is the program budget detail. For those that have been involved with the board meetings, this slide usually pops up where we discuss each of the percentage changes when it comes to each of the individual programs in the WDPF. So I'm going to pause here a moment and take a moment and take some questions. Good morning, Noelle. You have your hand up.
Good morning, David. Thank you for going over this. And I have a question based on John's comments and the fund drivers discussion, and then how this plays out in the percent fee change. So I know that Bob has made the point in numerous previous meetings about the reduction in irrigated ag lands and the need to right size the program at the state board so that it matches sort of the new reality of how many acres are in irrigated ag. And I'm wondering, based on John's comment, that when the water board was going through the exercise of determining where cuts should be made, they were not just doing straight across the board cuts, but prioritizing different programs and trying to target cuts. I'm wondering if you can share whether or not some of those considerations, like, okay, we recognize that there are fewer irrigated acres, so we should shrink that program to bet, like, were those sorts of the considerations, or are the cuts that, like, the reductions that we're seeing here really being driven separately by that higher level conversation around across the government pro rata reductions and size reductions? And when when the budget shifts and we get more BCPs in the future, we're going to be right back where we were before. I don't know if that makes sense and you could share any.
Well, John, before you step in, let me maybe just add, first to kind of answer your question regarding irrigated lands. And so, we work closely with the regional boards, specifically, of course, Central Valley, because they have the most acres. And we continue to analyze how many acres are in the program and also, review what the reductions are looking like and or if they're going to add any. And I know there's a couple of still small regions out there that are working on ag orders, which is going to bring in some acres here in the near future. So kind of based on all those numbers, that's where and based on the current fee structure, based on the per acre charge and the base fee and so forth, we're still in a position of collect about $9.9 million. And this is also kind of forecasting if there's a slight decrease that's going to happen, but we feel comfortable with that number and that revenue number. And so, and then I know John will step in here in a moment here. Yes, the organization and executive management prioritize, where some of the reductions would come from, specifically when we're talking about 24. And for water quality, many of those reductions or selections of what programs to reduce had to come with our monitoring programs. And so that would have been SWAMP and of course Gamma, right? And as we know, SWAMP and Gamma are also a foundational program. So in the WDPF, the foundational programs, of course, are spread out to everybody. So that was one of the kind of major priorities that took place for the WDPF. I mean, there's others like oil and gas, but they have their own fund. There's some other programs out there, but specifically for the WDPF, a lot of it came from the monitoring programs that were reduced. With that said, I will toss it here to John.
Yeah, so there were two aspects to this reduction. One was the vacancy reduction, and we were asked to eliminate approximately half of our existing vacancies. And the vacancies are at any given moment, they're just where they are within our organization. So we approached the vacancy reductions so that we wouldn't disproportionately take a greater amount of staff from any particular region or organization. So in that one, we did try to do a proportionate reduction where we spread the reductions across all of the organizations. We didn't just say, oh, water quality, you happen to have a bunch of vacancies right now, so we're going to take them all. We didn't take that approach. And basically, everybody suffered equally in that reduction. The second half was basically the operating budget reduction. And like David said, we do not have a lot of general fund. So we couldn't really, we had to dig into our special funds. And we couldn't do the reductions kind of nickel and dime across everybody and come up with the amount of money that we needed to reduce. So we looked for large contracts. We had a couple of really big monitoring contracts in the Gamma and the Swamp program that we got rid of. And then we also reduced our oil and gas program quite a bit. And though that program is supported by fee payers, but they don't pay the fee to us. CalGEM, they pay the fee to CalGEM, and then CalGEM gives us some money. So, there will be some fee payer relief in that program, but we won't be talking about it here because it really isn't fees that we collect. But the main thing that we did prioritize really heavily was our drinking water program. That was a high enough priority program for us that we basically didn't take any cuts at all in that program if we possibly could, just to protect the drinking water program throughout the state. So that's pretty much how we approached it. It was a very high level kind of thing. We didn't get down into the individual programs and say, do you have too many staff for what the program is at this particular time or anything. And I was going to ask my budget staff to put together kind of a high-level summary of all the reductions that we've taken so that it is transparent and everybody can see where we took the reductions. I'm going to wait a little bit on that since the legislature and the administration are now talking again. And once we have a final reduction amount, though, we'll put together some kind of a summary that we can share with everybody so you can see what we actually did.
Thanks.
And I think just to touch base a little bit on the vacancies, specifically to WDPF, one thing that comes to mind is, of course, 3 years ago there was a cannabis BCP where the WDPF got roughly around 50 positions. We've had these kind of discussions where our revenue levels never came in to where we were able to support all those positions. So internally, what we've had to do is basically kind of put them on hold, keep them vacant. And so we never recruited for them, basically. Others, we had to kind of just move around into other vacant positions that had funding for them. Part of this drill, when we asked to give up vacancies, we knew those positions, we just didn't have the revenue. So the cannabis program, those positions were, of course, moved away, basically, or part of the reduction sweep. And eventually, the budget will be trued up, basically, that we'll know, okay, this is how many positions that we have in the cannabis program, and this is the revenue that's being supported. I believe Debbie, you were next in the queue. Good morning, Debbie.
Okay, let's see if I can get this. There we go. Okay, great. And thank you on that. I know I know I'm not supposed to have two comments, but I just want to echo what Bob said earlier about the both the legal costs being more general fund or that BCP being more general fund and its duration. We agree with that. The question that I have is from our last sheet, and maybe you answered this a little bit with Noel, but from our last sheet, you were talking about a 7% reduction, and I don't really see that in here. And maybe I'm just not getting it, but can you connect the dots for me?
Yeah, no problem. So basically what 7.2% means is the overall decrease in the whole fund, right? And so the fund's going from 202 million to 187, right? Which is about 14.5 million. That 14.5 million represents a 7% reduction in the total budget. And so that number, then when you look at here on the budget detail, that's not going to translate in the form of the revenue itself, because now we look at, well, how much revenue are we collecting? Again, forecasting based on, I guess, number of permits, application revenues. And so again, we're looking at 191 million. Again, compared to the 187, what we project the budget to be, that's a net difference of $4 million, right? So to achieve a reduction of $4 million in revenue, it represents these percentage changes, right?
Yeah.
And so based on, again, some programs are generating a little more than others, and that's where, and of course, that's how the numbers come about, right? So again, the 7% is more or less the reduction in the total expenditures in the program.
Okay. I think I get it. I'll just have to look a little bit more, but thank you.
Okay. I will ask one more time, any questions through the emails? And there are no email questions. And again, before we move to the next slide, we'll say this at the end, and I probably should have said this at the beginning. Once this meeting's over, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Jackie or Cassandra or John if you start looking at these spreadsheets and you start listening more to the legislators, and you have some follow-up questions. Please reach out to us, and we'll do our best to help answer your questions. Next slide, please. Okay, so this moves us into the fund condition. And I know we kind of explained this in the past, but the top of the spreadsheet basically is a overall review of our fee funds, our revenues, and our expenditures. And the bottom portion is related to fines and penalties, the revenues that we collect for fines and penalties, and the expenditures we're spending. Just kind of a reminder that the fines and penalty information down below, we're not authorized to use that to support staff cost. The fines and penalties expenditures can only be authorized when the legislation approves them for specific projects. However, of course, we account for them separately because they're commingled within the WDPF when it comes to expenditures. But we, of course, want to highlight it in this perspective here. So just kind of working our way back, basically, just fiscal year 23-24. These numbers are final. These numbers were submitted to State Controller's Office and are, kind of now part of the Department of Finance's fund conditions that you'd see on Finance's website. For 23-24, we ended the year with about a 12.7% fund reserve. And so moving forward to kind of where we're at for fiscal year 24-25, and keep in mind, like, our expenditures at this point are still a projection because year end hasn't closed and accounting's still working on labor reports. But we're anticipating ending the year with roughly about a 12% reserve. So when you look at fiscal year 25-26, and this is the column that says no fee changes, and we look at our total fee program revenue, this is the number where we'd be collecting $192.3 million, which was on the budget detail. And our total program expenditures would be $187.3 million. So, of course, that's based on the May revise, and that includes those reductions. What's that doing is basically we have a gain of almost $5 million comparing our revenues with expenditures. What that also does, it drives our fund reserve up to nearly 15%. So we want to paint that picture. But for 25-26 with the fee changes, so looking at again that budget detail and of course the percentage adjustments that if those were proposed and adopted by the board, then our revenue would be roughly around $188 million, and which our program expenditures would be, of course, about $187.3 million. So now we're starting to kind of balance the fund basically with revenues and expenditures. Again, kind of drop, with the fund reserve about 12.9%. So, this is kind of a snapshot of what's going on. What I also kind of want to mention is that we do recognize that, we try to maintain, well, let me say this. I recognize that we're starting to move into a little higher than a prudent fund reserve, basically. And I know in the past we've been able to utilize some of the revenues to also, in addition, offset, fee increases. And so those are some discussions. If we continue through this process, and it looks like that the fund is going to become healthy like this and maintain higher reserves, that there is our option that through the briefings that we will suggest this to the board, that there's an opportunity to kind of reduce our fund reserve by offsetting fees. Kind of keep in mind a couple of things is, if we don't do it this year, there's an opportunity to minimize it, of course, in the future. So that is kind of, on the table that we would have those discussions with the board. The other thing too, though, is when we also don't want to get us into a kind of a structural deficit each year when we're looking at revenues and expenditures. So what that basically means is, in future years, we'd have to raise fees to kind of balance that out also. So again, we're recognizing that our funds have gone up. I will say one of the reasons that our funds have built a little bit of a prudent reserve. If you were to look at 23, 24, our expenditures were about 176. Revenues came in roughly around 191. This is basically kind of when the start of when we started to kind of hear about these drills. And what we did internally is we put in a policy basically to kind of freeze hiring at the time because we knew that we had to go through these drills. We knew we had to start looking at what vacancies we may need to reduce. So on our end, we wanted to basically kind of freeze hiring to kind of maintain whatever vacancy level that we needed. And however, of course, what that does in a program land or a fund, it starts to provide some salary savings. And again, 24, 25, those numbers are still kind of a work in progress because the county hasn't finalized the expenditure reports. We should have that information for the next meeting, but I do expect some expenditure savings that are also just again based on some processes and policies that we took place internally at the water board to kind of maintain our salary savings.
Yeah, that's probably a good point for the reminder that these are not the final numbers. We'll have a final number after or final analysis, I should say, um, after the budget is adopted, hopefully here in June, and goes into effect July 1st. And then like David said, that's the point that we take the feedback that we hear from all of you, and then we go to our board members and brief them on what we've heard and what the analysis of the budget says, and we see what they want to do. Do they want to use the higher fund reserve to offset fees, or do they want to use it to kind of smooth out fees a little bit so that we don't have potentially large jumps from year to year? They've done that in the past. So we do take this to the board, and they are the policymakers. We're just sort of the nuts and bolts analysts in this, and then we take it to them and they make the final decision. And then, of course, they take all the feedback that they hear during the board hearing itself for the fee adoption board meeting, and then they base their final decision on everything they've heard.
Noelle, you have your hand up.
Thanks, David. Remind me again, so a few years ago, I remember one of the big topics was the need to create the fund reserve, and was the significant cost driver. What was the percent goal that was trying to be met for that?
Well, so of course, what happened that was kind of during the pandemic, basically, or right after the pandemic. So what happened kind of during those years is that we definitely used our fund reserve and we drew it down almost to like a zero balance as a result of course, trying to offset and minimize fee increases, of course, during COVID and during the pandemic. We were trying to drive at that time around 5%. Now, kind of keep on mind, kind of run this number, but a $200 million with 5% is, not a lot of money basically for a fund reserve. And then when economic uncertainties happen, things like that. But we knew we had to have some reserve. So that's why we were adjusting the fund, right? What I will say is, and, we have these discussions with finance and things like that. It's definitely better for us to have some fund reserve where we're not, increasing fees based on, of course, cost drivers, but also then on the top of that is also having to build a fund reserve. So, but again, a lot of this has been done by a lot of the internal salary savings that we've been having to do to just kind of meet these, budget reduction drills.
Yeah, so historically for this fund, we shoot for a 5% fund reserve. We've found over the years that that's usually a good level to shoot for.
But again, 5%, of course, because this fund is a larger fund. You'll hear us talk like with the water rights fund and the drinking water fund, which are, between 40 and 50 million. Those we're probably looking more around the 10% just because it's a smaller fund and we need a little bit more of a reserve. So those translate to more or less like about a 10% reserve.
Well, thank you for that. And I will just say, from California wineries, they are really facing a challenging market. We lost the Canadian market completely, which is a $1 billion market for California wines. I mean, there was good news this week that 2 provinces have reopened, but we still don't have access to 80% of the Canadian market. So this would be a wonderful time to reduce fees for our industry, at least. So thanks.
Thank you. Good morning, Sharon. You have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I guess I'm kind of was also going to ask about the reserve and the projections. And actually, while we were talking, I pulled up last year's handout from the June 2024 meeting, and the reserve numbers were just completely different that you were showing at that time. Just looking at the percents and dollar amounts, they were basically roughly half of what you're showing here, even for FY 22-23, FY 23-24, so prior years. So it is very confusing. I'm having trouble reconciling this and why we are so much above that target of around 5%.
Well, I mean, keep in mind, again, everything's kind of a moving target. We have to wait until the water board's accounting office closes our books, basically, which for the most part happens, around middle of August. So a lot of the information during the stakeholder meetings are kind of a forecast, right? That's going on. The other thing that we recognize, like here on the fund condition in 23-24, there's what's known as a prior year adjustment, and sometimes it's a positive, and that's usually a result of like unspent contract dollars that come back into the fund. The other thing sometimes though, here it's a negative, and a lot of this has to do with like prior year encumbrances that are being adjusted from like a prior year. So it doesn't hit the books, it moves over to the next fiscal year. We try to project it, but we don't have those final numbers until accounting is able to, of course, determine it and make those decisions. So again, a lot of the information again is what we know at the time, and so what was presented, a year ago is going to be completely different than what happened. Of course, what we show too also is we show like the full budgets, right? And so what happens when the year closes, now we're talking about what the actual expenditures were, right? All the maybe the vacancies and which would help, reduce staff cost, right? People leave jobs and things like that. So, it takes a few months to rehire. So we don't have expenditures hidden some of those programs. So again, there's a lot of moving pieces. And so we do our best to show it, but it is very difficult to look back at a fund condition a year ago and kind of compare the two.
And the reserve isn't like your household reserve where it's just, you set aside a certain amount of money in your savings account for an emergency type of thing, and it just sits there. Basically, this reserve is just the difference between our revenue and expenditures. So it kind of floats around, and we hope we can balance those two to have at any given time or over the course of the year, have built up a reserve.
Yeah, I get that. I guess it's just, I understand that there's a lot of moving parts and so forth. It just is a little disconcerting because I'm not sure if it was last year or the year before. I think it was last year that we raised fees basically to replenish the reserve. And now with a little bit of hindsight, we're seeing how much more there was. And it's just a little shocking really to see these numbers. I mean, I guess it's good in a way because there's more revenue, more in the fund balance than anticipated, but it's just quite surprising that it's so much of a fluctuation.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say it wasn't last year that we went ahead and raised fees, but keep in mind, for 25-26, when you have these reductions, your expenditures are going down, and you're looking at the amount of revenue that we'd be collecting. Of course, it would bump up the fund reserve. That's why, again, one of the options to kind of minimize that is to do some fee reductions, right? And of course, the fee reductions we're showing at this time doesn't include, of course, what the fund reserve would add to that, right? I mean, again, like John said, through the discussions and us having discussions and briefings with the board members, we would flag that there's definitely a fund reserve and there's an opportunity to utilize that if needed. And the board could choose, like John said, to minimize the fee increases for this year and add to that, or minimize fee increases over the next year or so, for next fiscal year.
Yeah, and David mentioned it before. The reserve is higher this year because we purposely kept our expenditures low. We knew these two vacancy and budget reduction drills were coming, but we didn't know how they would impact us. So we purposely kept quite a few vacancies open. So we weren't spending the money that we normally would. If we had those hired to fill those vacancies, the reserve would be a lot less than you see there.
Good morning, Bob. You have your hand up?
Yeah, yes, I do. Two comments with the goal of helping everybody out. First of all, with Aglands acreage, one of our clients, Kings River Conservation District, has about little over 1 million acres irrigated. They've seen it decline a substantial amount. I will send you the precise figure, but this is in support of what Noel said. It's somewhere around 200,000 acres that they've been notified probably will be taken out of irrigation. I'll confirm that and get it to you. Secondly, and more impactful, and John is well aware of this, our friends at the Department of Finance have already started doing fund sweeps. And I know you got the budget letter of the 9th restricting travel next year. So what I'm getting at is the state finally got serious in restricting expenses. What concerns me is this fund balance, aka our money, could be swept. Now, as you point out, it to a certain extent doesn't exist exactly, in that it's a fluctuating, imprecise estimate, as all state funds are. But, and I'll bring this up to the board, I worry that next fiscal year, when push comes to shove, and it will, with 3 years of deficits in excess of $10 billion, we may lose this. I mean, the underground tank storage fund is loaning the general fund a couple $100 million, I guess. And we're right next door in the books for Joe Steppenshaw's guys to find. So anyway, keep that in mind, please, when you make a recommendation to the board about maybe expending some of this fund balance before it gets expended for us. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. We never want it to get too high because we're not in the business of making money per se. And it's always, like Bob said, it's always at risk of being swept. So that's why we keep it pretty low in general, 5% or so.
Just waiting here and see if there's any email questions. No email questions. Okay, let's go ahead and go back to the agenda and our next item here. And I'm going to toss this to Cassandra to give an update on the water quality certification fees and the updates that have been taking place so far.
Okay, thank you, David. So on May 7th, we held the first water quality cert stakeholder meeting. Fee staff provided an overview of the fee setting process, highlighting like timelines and guiding principles for setting WDPF fees. And program staff presented methodology revisions for categories A and E. And based on the feedback received from the first meeting, we will continue to work with program to flesh out the concepts. And then in addition, we're analyzing routine maintenance project fees. So as we mentioned in the March stakeholder meeting, and I think David mentioned earlier, the anticipated adoption of any of these approved concepts would not go into effect until fiscal year 26-27. And the next water quality stakeholder meeting will be scheduled in October or November. And I just wanted to remind everyone, if you are interested, please make sure you're signed up for our mailing list, which is the Fee Regulations Water Quality. And that was just the update for that. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you. Hand it back to you, David.
Thank you, Cassandra. So again, item number 6 here kind of leads us into our open discussion as an opportunity to discuss any of the items that we've talked about, or if there's items anyone wants to bring up, I'd be more than happy to discuss them at this moment. Debbie, hi, good morning. You have your hand up.
Yeah, good morning again. Sorry, I've got in the allergy problem also right now. Just out of curiosity, I know the swamp program was highlighted as one of those areas where there was, a question for cost savings, and I know there are also I heard you say you're gonna provide the information, but it changed from a surcharge to an inclusion within the program as the way that it was charged. What type of reductions, just overall, what kind of reductions we're seeing it within that program?
I don't have the numbers in front of me. I think I think the combination, if I remember the budget letter, the combination of the swamp and gamma were approximately about a $5.7 million reduction to both swamp and gamma together. So so that was the portion that the water board allocated and made part of the reduction drill.
Okay, and how much is that program overall? Do you have an idea? Or those two, I should say.
Yeah, I want because I'm combining the two, right?
Yeah.
I want to say it's close to about 30 million with both of them. I could be wrong. Do you have an idea, Cassandra?
I think that number is pretty close to 30 million.
Yeah. They're pretty much equal when it comes to both the gamma and the swamp, the budgets.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that.
No problem. Bob, you have your hand up?
Yes, I did. I just wanted to convey my sincere thank you to Cassandra for the announcements and information and data about the cost management efforts. This is something the fee payers, stakeholders have been advocating for 7, 8 years now. And it's excellent to see it embedded. Thank you again, all of you.
Thank you. So again, I'm not seeing any other questions. At this time, there's no other questions through the emails. I guess before we adjourn here, I could toss it to John. John, if you have any exit comments here you want to add.
Not really, other than what you had mentioned earlier. That is, if anybody has any additional questions as you look at the data or anything, don't hesitate to reach out to Cassandra or David or me or Jackie or any of the fee staff, really, and we can get an answer to your question for you.
Thank you. So one update I just want to mention is that today at 1 o'clock we'll be hosting the water rights fee stakeholder meeting. So those that may be interested in that, that'll be taking place at 1 o'clock. Again, I want to thank everyone for taking the time to meet with us. We appreciate your feedback, your input. we can't do without you and of course, your participation in this process. We look forward to seeing you at the next stakeholder meeting again, which is July 31st. Please keep an eye on, of course, what's going on in the budget process. Again, we're gonna have more discussion about that at our next meeting. And again, as John mentioned, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. With that said, we'll adjourn this meeting and everyone have a good day. Thank you again.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
You.